Hey everyone, thanks for checking out part 1 of my lore retrospective for the Blair Witch. In this episode, we're going to cover the earliest parts of the timeline. We're going to go through Elly Kedward's past, Blair, and how she became the Blair Witch. Let's start off with the earliest piece of media, which is the trial of Elly Kedward. Now we're going to talk about version 1. This is a website created by one of the series creators, and it had a flash animation that mysteriously appeared online and told the horrific story of Elly Abigail Kedward. While some of the details are correct, likely those that are easily researched about Elly, there's a lot of speculation in terms of the horrible things that happened to her as a child and where she learned her witchcraft. Most of this has been retconned just this year with the release of version 2 of this website, so let's get right into that. Version 2 of the website, which is up right now, is a web series with side articles by the original creators of the Blair Witch that tells the true story, for now, of Elly Abigail Kedward. The kind of setup here is that the story was found in Elly's own journal. No one knew it existed, but it was found among the possessions of William Barnes, the head of the Burkittsville Historical Society, following his death. It was translated from the original Gaelic and authenticated by the Department of Irish Studies at Princeton University as being written by Elly Kedward between 1745 and 1769. So this story has been adapted for this ongoing series. The story begins in Ireland with Donal Adóhan Kedward, who faces pressure to work on the family farm when all he wants to do is pursue his studies and art. Once his mother passes away, he leaves home to do that. He ends up 600 kilometers away in Glengariff, a town of around 200 people, where he meets wheelwright Colin, who offers him a job working on his livestock farm, and allows Donal to focus on his studies and art in his spare time. There he meets Colin's daughter, Adamar Kedward, whom he falls in love with. Colin dies of pneumonia in February of 1728. Shortly after, Donal and Adamar marry and conceive a child. However, before the baby is born, Donal dies from smallpox. That night, Adamar gives birth to a baby girl, but discovers she's bleeding out from the delivery and won't live long. She uses the last of her energy to write a note and tucks it in with the baby, saying her name is Elly Kedward. And with that, Elly Abigail Kedward was born on October 21st, 1729. That night, a tired and hungry drifter comes across the home, hears a crying baby, and sees the dead mother. He takes all the food from the house and tries to move on, almost leaving the baby, but then he has a change of heart and takes the baby 28 kilometers away to the town of Perricknaglain in County Kerry. There he leaves the baby at a Catholic orphanage where she's raised by the Bon Secours Sisters of St. Mary's. Adamar's body is later discovered by the other townsfolk in Glengariff, and it's assumed that the baby was dead, maybe taken by animals. She's buried next to her husband. And that's that. The following 10 years at the orphanage are miserable for young Elly, as she's abused and pimped out. She survives by escaping deep into a fantasy world, where she's a princess with a happy family. In her dreams, she would play with stick-figure soldiers that would protect her. When she was finally fostered out, she ran away the first chance she got, and ended up in the sketchy town of Skibbereen. She's found by the authorities, assumed to be a prostitute, and arrested and jailed. She survives with her faith in God and by escaping into her delusional fantasy world, but eventually even those dreams turn into horrible nightmares. Then, in 1740, Ireland is hit with what's now become known as the Year of the Slaughter, where a record eruption somewhere else in the world led to record cold winters and near impossible farming conditions in Ireland. The famine leads to over 300,000 deaths. Elly only survives by spending most of her time in prison for small crimes and resorting to cannibalism. In 1743, at age 13, free from prison, she finds St. John's Cathedral and feels safe for the first time ever in the light of God. The priest there, Father Henry, recognizes how much she suffered and that she still has faith in God. He ends up giving her food, clothes, a room to stay in, and becomes a father figure for her, teaching her how to read and write over the next couple years. She's devoted herself to God in studying the Bible, looking for His mercy and forgiveness, and slowly overcoming the horrors of her childhood. 7 years later, Father Henry passes away, leaving Elly a letter to guide her into the future. It expresses how proud he is of her, and says that with her faith, God will always be there for her. The loss of her father figure hits Elly hard, and that's as far as the series has gotten for now. Season 4 of the web series will be released this fall, so hopefully we'll get to see a bit more about what happens there. In the retconned version 1 of the site, Elly was taken in by a religious hermit before the Year of the Slaughter, who teaches her the Transvitus Flui, a written language used in witchcraft, also known as the witch's cipher, and something referred to as the primal custom of Twana. It's unclear if and how she'll learn these things in the new series, but regardless, we know she ends up on the Reliant ship bound to America in 1769, and does end up in the town of Blair, Maryland. So let's step back a bit and talk about that little town. Before the town is founded, though, the first recorded sign of trouble in that area comes from an American folklore book passage included in the Dossier. In 1632, Martin Filippo, cousin of the founder of Maryland Colony, leads a party to establish a trading post west of the colony. However, the Native American guide they have refuses to go into the Black Hills Forest and tries to sabotage the mission. From some additional research in the Dossier, it notes that while an area like the Black Hills Forest would be the kind of place that Native American tribes would thrive in, there's no record of any tribes having settled in or around that area, despite many tribes being in that region, including the Nanticoke, Susquehanna, and Powhatan tribes. Martin returns to Baltimore in failure and makes a recommendation that a new group go out led by Colonel Nathan Blair. In case all that wasn't clear, the takeaway here is that this forest was bad news long before Elly got there. In 1634, Nathan Blair successfully sets up an outpost near the Black Hills Forest. He dies soon after, and his wife continues to run the little town of Blair. Once Elly Kedward arrives in Blair, there's not much information about what happens to her.
Though records from this period of history are scarce, this registry of the seafaring vessel, the Reliant, shows that a woman named Elly Kedward, the woman history has labeled as the Blair Witch, did in fact sail from Ireland to Baltimore in the summer of 1769.
The Blair Witch comic book, which is based on drawings of the disturbed patient C.C. Malvey, includes a story related to him by the witch when he escaped from the hospital and makes it into the woods. In that story, Elly Kedward is cursed and tries to keep to herself in Blair, but becomes the target of lies told by the town's kids. Some of the details in the story are pulled from the retconned first version of the trial of Elly Kedward, so we can't know if any of it is still true. More remarkably, the last book in the Blair Witch Files series retells the story of Elly Kedward as learned by a disturbed, self-proclaimed psychic with all kinds of twists and revelations. I consider this the ramblings of a crazy person, so I'll cover it more in a later video, but the quick version is that another woman makes it to Blair and pretends to be Elly after both her mother and Elly sacrifice their lives so that she can fulfill her destiny to die and become a powerful force in the Black Hills Forest. Whatever the actual story ends up being, we'll know if and when the new Trial of Elly Kedward series gets there. What we do know is that in February 1785, Elly Kedward was accused of taking blood from some of the kids in Blair. She's found guilty of being a witch and sentenced to death. They blindfold her, tie her to a wheelbarrow, and take her out into the Black Hills Forest, where they tie her to a tree and leave her there for dead in the middle of an extremely cold winter.
The story goes that she had bled a few children, and by that pinpricks. She was tried, summarily convicted, and banished.
What they did was they blindfolded her, took her out into the woods, and this was in the middle of the winter, tied her to a tree, and left her, where she soon succumbed to the elements.
According to this book I read, published in 1809, they tied her up really high and they strung these heavy rocks to her arms and legs as weights stretching her.
Ugh. In the spring, they went back to look for her body, but there was no trace of it.
The following year, the young lady who was her first accuser and most of the other children who were her accusers and children of the village vanished throughout the course of the winter. By the end of the winter, over half the town's children had disappeared.
In November of 1786, the townspeople have had enough, and scared for their families, they abandon the town.
Well, immediately, the townspeople blamed these disappearances on Elly the Witch. The people simply vacated the area. They left. They abandoned the community, and they never spoke about the incident again.
The third Blair Witch PC game fits in here. It tells the story of a priest who's also a witch hunter who travels to Blair to discover what's going on and learns of an evil spirit in the woods named Hecatomix. He's got to fight it off. I consider this a pretty fictional take on the story, but it's interesting to know.
In 1809, a rare book about the occurrences surrounding the Blair Witch legend was discovered, entitled The Blair Witch Cult. This tome is supposedly a collection of first-hand accounts that illustrate the effects of the infamous Blair Witch.
Yep, so the town of Blair is no more, but around November 1809, a book by an unknown author entitled The Blair Witch Cult is published. It tells gruesome stories of the horrible events that happened around Blair that victims and witnesses all attribute to the Blair Witch. Only one incomplete and extremely damaged copy is known to exist. It's held in the Burkittsville Historical Society before the site reclaimed it. The stories it tells are of a floating ugly hag that rips off people's heads and has complete control over the woods and the animals in them. The events described are so fanciful that it's generally considered fiction, except by the most hardcore believers in the Blair Witch. However, it does have some broken sentences referring to the trial, which state a couple interesting things. First, that Elly pleaded not guilty, that a jury of women testified to finding a witch's mark on her, but it disappeared, and that another woman claimed Elly persuaded her to also become a witch, and she had seen Elly having relations with the devil. Regardless of if any of that is true, this book is where the name The Blair Witch comes from in the lore. And that's it for this part of our Blair Witch retrospective. Stay tuned for part 2, where we're going to be talking a lot about the witch's powers, Burkittsville, the Creek and Coffin Rock, just a whole bunch of little interesting stuff before we get to some of the real big stuff that happens in the series. Thanks for checking this out. Subscribe to stay notified for when that's out, and I'll see you guys later. Bye.